Welcome back, everyone. So, today the title of our presentation is The Byzantine Arab Chronicle 741 AD, revisited in light of new evidence. So, as you know, I have dealt with this in my earlier channel, Sneakers Corner, and a number of things have kind of occurred to me of late that made me think about re-looking at some key passages in this. I suppose the key thing about the Byzantine Arab Chronicle is it proposes a list of the first leaders of the Saracens, which that's the first thing that's kind of important. The second thing it offers us is the supposed location of Mecca or Mecca. And you'll probably remember that I suggested that because the Ur of the Chaldeans was most likely Edessa, I suggested that the location of Mecca, according to the 741 Chronicle, would have been somewhere between Edessa and Kara, which would have been somewhere like way up north, which would be, say, in southern Turkey nowadays, maybe northern Iraq, so somewhere up there. Um, Now, the thing about that, I was trying to imagine how they would have viewed Ur of the Chaldeans back then. Certainly in the 19th century, um, archaeologists suggested that Ur was in southern Iraq. So it's possible that back then they thought it was in southern Iraq. At least some people may have thought of it, even though that, in my view, is probably wrong when you think about Abraham traveling first to from Ur to Haran and then down into Israel. It makes more sense to have it up north. But I suppose I can't assume that the writers of this chronicle had the correct um, understanding of where Ur was originally. In any case, they're using that as their way of saying where this Mecca was. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's consider it afresh. Okay, and in particular, I'm going to see what happens if we take the idea that it's southern Iraq rather than the other, and see what location we get from that. Okay, as well as that, we'll look at some key figures mentioned among the leaders of the Saracens in that early period. Okay, so I hope you like the graphic there, Heman and the Masters of the Universe. Um, in the Chronicle, it mentions the following, and this is a translation from the Latin. For the Saracens, et Heman, or et Heman, depending on how you might pronounce it, assumed the leadership of his people and ruled for 12 years. Now, I would suggest that it doesn't take much uh, deciphering there that this is Heman the first, the Jewish exilarch, specifically the 38th exilarch. His name came down to us as Utman, so we can see how the name has morphed. Generally, the Jewish name has been concealed by Arabizing it, changing it in different ways, Latinizing it, and so we no longer can see what is staring us in the face. Um, Now, it's interesting that this cartoon has He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. I would love to know if the people who created this cartoon were aware of the fact that He-Man is actually one of the Jewish exilarchs. Are they trying to tell us something there? Um, I'm sure AJ Juice will have a good laugh at this, but I think probably they didn't know this, but you never know. They're a lot of these creators are well aware of histories and so forth. But anyway, so that's He-Man. So his father was Shalom, also known as Hanamel, the 37th exilarch, who is known in Islamic tradition as Salman al-Farsi. Shalom's brother, Nehemiah II, was considered a messianic figure on account of the conquest of Jerusalem in 614, and he was the 36th exilarch. Okay, so this is all connected. We have this here. from the Chronicle. The bit at the beginning is my saying this. In fact, it says that in the 7th year of Heraclius, in the 7th year of the aforementioned princeps, which will be 617 AD, hostile Saracen rebels of the Roman provinces began causing disturbances, and a huge multitude of the Saracens brought together invaded the provinces of Syria, Arabia, and Mesopotamia. Who's leading them is the big question. Holding the principate over them, so that's kind of like the holding the reins of power, okay, who the king of the kingdom, as it were. Holding the principate over them was a man by the name of Machmet, born of the noblest tribe of that people. He was a rather knowledgeable man and a foreseer of some things to come. Now, based on everything we know, Machmet was clearly a messianic title. It meant essentially the same as Messiah. Now, for anyone to be a Messiah, and this is something I haven't emphasized enough, they must be in the line of David. They must be Jewish. Okay, this is crucial. They can't claim it without proving that they have the pedigree. Okay, so this person has to be Jewish. I know it says Saracen rebels, and we can get led astray with that, but who is the leader? It's a Jewish leader, and he has the title of Machmed. Okay, now it says born of the noblest tribe. Okay, so there's tribes and then there's noble tribes. Well, to be in the line of David is the noblest of the noblest. Okay, so that fits. Now, a knowledgeable man. Okay, a foreseer of some things to come, which could actually mean a prophet, but a knowledgeable man. Who would be knowledgeable? Well, the Exilarch. The Exilarch is involved in leading the Jewish people, would have some knowledge of the Talmud, in fact, an in-depth knowledge of the Talmud and languages and so forth. Okay, leading the people in many different ways. Okay, so that would fit the bill. Okay, now if we think about it, who was it that conquered Jerusalem? It was Nehemiah II. Now there's a bit of confusion around when did he die. I just assumed from one paper I've read that he was killed and died in 614. I've heard from AJ Juice that there's some questions about that. It could have been a little bit later that he actually died. That's the nature of it. But he was still alive in 617. Then Machmed would certainly be him. Okay. So Nehemiah II would therefore be considered the one titled Machmed. He was the first in the line of David at that time. If you're first in the line of David, you became the Exilarch, essentially. There is confusion as to whether he died in 614 or 617, as I've just mentioned. If the latter, this makes more sense. Okay. All of these trace their family tree back to David and hence could potentially claim to be the Messiah, the Machmed. So, in case you're not getting this, the line of David here in this terminology would be the same as the line of Machmed and the line of Ahmed. Okay, so we can see there, now this is just a tiny part of the overall family tree, but Nehemiah II was the 36th Exilarch from 606 to sometime such as 614 or 617, depending on which is the accurate dating on that. Hanamel, or Shalom, was the 37th Exilarch, the brother of Nehemiah II. He's known in Islamic traditions as Salman al-Farsi. So you can see that names are being Arabized. Okay, now Nehemiah has been given the title of Machmed. That's a Jewish title there. So that's not completely Arabizing, it's not completely concealed. Okay, so Salman al-Farsi, or Shalom, had a son, and his name was Heman the First, the 38th Exilarch, and he has come down in Islamic tradition as Uthman. It's because of that et that's been added to Heman, Heman, Uthman. Hopefully that's clear enough. Okay, so the ek becomes the u, and there you have that. Okay, so just a bit of a jumbling around with letters, and you have Uthman. All right. Now, what we find is that in each case, their names have been Arabized so that intentionally or unintentionally their more Jewish names are concealed. Now, in relation to this, I got a very interesting comment from a viewer called Century Sense 4312 yesterday, and thank you very much to you. This is probably was the inspiration of this video, to be honest. It triggered something in my mind. I was driving along today, and it just popped into my mind about the Chronicle. Hadn't looked at it in a while, and just the penny dropped, and I went looking at it, and I was, okay, I think I've got something here. So anyway, thank you to that viewer. He says, I remember a story from Mahmud Ahmadinejad's time that said that one reason why he took such a virulent anti-Israel stance was because there were rumors of a Jewish background in his family history, and that this aggressive stance was made partially to counter those rumors. That's understandable. The story said that while his father did change their family surname, that there was no known Jewish history there. I now look back on that story very differently after learning all this information about the exilarchs from you. His mother was supposedly a descendant of Muhammad, and the new surname they took means in the lineage of Ahmed. I didn't know that. Ahmadinejad means in the lineage of Ahmed. Very interesting. So it's kind of a taking on a name like Ahmadinejad is essentially claiming Jewish ancestry. Didn't know that. It all seems to be ringing bells in my head. Maybe I'm reaching, but perhaps it's worth looking into him and his real family history. Big fan of your work, Mel, by the way. Thank you very much. It's very kind of you. So look again. So Ahmadinejad means in the lineage of Ahmed. And as I've explained up here, the line of David is the same as the line of Mahmed. It's the same as the line of Ahmed. Okay. So that name, that surname is literally sending out the message that he's Jewish, he's and can trace his ancestry all the way back to King David. That's quite incredible, isn't it? Now, so that's the man himself, and we can see here. This is taken from Wikipedia. His mother, Hanam, was a Sayyida, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, an honorific title given to those believed to be direct bloodline descendants of the Islamic prophet Muhammad, but also I would suggest it ultimately means a descendant of King David. Okay. Now, finally, in this document, the Chronicle that I've mentioned, we have the first mention of Mecca outside of the Quran. So remember, the Chronicle was written in 741 AD. And where it places it confirms what I've been saying. Okay, so we're looking at it afresh now, taking Ur of the Chaldeans as in southern Iraq. In the first year of his rule, he directed all the experience and virtue of the mind of his army against Abdallah, whom his father had attacked so many times in various wars, all the way finally to Mecca, as they consider it, the home of Abraham, which lies in the desert between Ur of the Chaldeans and Kara, the city of Mesopotamia. Now, this is talking about Abd al-Malik waging a war, and it goes all the way to Mecca. Okay? Now, we obviously know that Baghdad is the center of power. It's where all the academies are, okay? But is this the solution? Okay, let's have a look. So, the question is where the author thought Ur of the Chaldeans was. This is the bit that's crucial. I believe it makes more sense for it to be the location of Edessa. However, perhaps the author thought it was in southern Iraq. So I've mentioned this a few times. Sometimes things are said provisionally, and when I suggested Edessa, it's provisional on the basis that that is probably the more historically accurate location, but the author of this chronicle may have thought it was elsewhere. In any case, if we accept it was in southern Iraq that he had in mind, then where does that give us? Okay, so you can see on the map on the left, Karhe, which is Kara, it's just there on the map, just below Edessa. Okay, so on the right, Karhe is just south of Haran there on the map. So we see that red line there, and we have Ur suggested there on the map as well. So somewhere between the endpoints of that red line is where is Mecca or Mecca. Okay. Now, here's another map. This is a map of Iraq. So that I would suggest that somewhere in there would be the middle point. Okay. Now it doesn't have to be exactly in the middle. It just says between them. But there's where all the action is happening. You have Al-Hira, you have Surah, you have Baghdad, etc. All those locations. All right. Pampatita, which is actually, as we discovered, Baghdad. All right. Now, let's look at this. So we know from the Qibla directions that Baghdad was a central focus, which is no surprise because that's where the Exarch lived. That's also where the Caliph lived. Now, you will notice that there are some lines that are going parallel to Baghdad. If you see where Karbala is, and it's heading down sort of to the bottom left, if you follow those red lines down, guess where these Qibla lines are pointing to? Jerusalem, which no doubt was a place where the Exarch lived for some time. Nehemiah II, for example, lived there. And then there's the odd line. There's a line there passing by Najaf. That one comes close to Petra, but not quite connects with Petra. But primarily, you'll see that most of those lines are either heading towards Jerusalem or passing through Baghdad. There are a couple of stray ones. They are heading to Narbonne. As we know, the Jewish Nazi is up there. So we can ignore the top two for the purposes of what we're dealing with now in terms of Mecca. Okay. So home is where the heart is, they say. Well, perhaps home is where the Shekinah is. God promised to dwell among his people. This presence is referred to as the Shekinah. Wherever the Exarch was, there was the Shekinah. Now, it's interesting how the word sheikh, which the etymology means an old person, it's very similar to Shekinah, but that, I think, is just an etymological coincidence as far as I can tell. But in any case, passing that over, and that's just an observation, not an assertion here. Where the Shekinah was, there was Mecca or Makkah. That's the idea. So the Exarch happened to be in Baghdad, so that's where they believed the Shekinah was. And according to the 741 Chronicle, that was where Mecca was. Doesn't necessarily mean that was what is suggested at the time of the writing of the Quran, but possibly. Okay. Now, the point with the Shekinah, it isn't fixed. It's wherever the Exarch is, so it's movable. So that's something that I'll keep having to repeat, because a lot of people have got the idea that it has to be a fixed location. It doesn't. It all depended on where God's presence is, which according to the Jewish thinking was where the Exarch was, the Jewish leader. Okay. Now we have to come back to Benjamin of Tudela again. Again, this is really significant to understand all of this. I think this may be the third time I've come back to him, and it's really for the benefit of those who you don't always see all of the videos, and you may be lost. So it's really for those people. But for those who've seen it before, it might be no harm to see one more time just to kind of grasp this. So I'm just going to read from this at length, really, and I'll pick out any key points here. Hence, it is 2 days to Baghdad. Benjamin is a Jewish man who visits Baghdad in the 1260s. Okay, just to put this in context, 1260s AD. It is 2 days to Baghdad, the great city and royal residence of the Caliph Emir al-Mu'minin al-Abbasi of the family of Muhammad. He is the head of the Mohammedan religion, and all the kings of Islam obey him. He occupies a similar position to that held by the Pope over the Christians. Now, if we think about the idea that the religion is called the Mohammedan religion, and we know Mahmed is a messianic title, then essentially this is a messianic religion. It's worth bearing that in mind. So the Caliph is the head of a messianic religion. Essentially, they've turned their family lineage into a religion. It's almost called turning yourself into a religious, well, I won't say god, but it's not far off it, is it? So your family has become a religion, essentially. He has a palace in Baghdad, 3 miles in extent, wherein is a great park with all varieties of trees, fruit bearing, otherwise. All of that is kind of not relevant. Let's just jump on and down a bit further. There, the great king Al-Abbasi, the Caliph, holds his court, and he is kind unto Israel. Now, that says so much. If we think about the relationship between Iran and Israel at the moment, good reminder for both groups that Jews and Muslims used to have a very friendly and very close relationship back in the 13th century. So just a reminder. So he is kind unto Israel, and many belonging to the people of Israel are his attendants. So the Jewish people are working for him. He knows all languages. Bit of an exaggeration, but he's a multilingual person. He's well versed in the law of Israel, so he knows the Torah. He knows all the various laws and so forth. Sounds quite Jewish, doesn't it? He reads and writes the holy language, Hebrew. Okay, so bear that in mind. And let's look at this other passage again from Benjamin of Tudela. The men of Islam see him once in the year. The pilgrims that come from distant lands to go unto Mecca, which is in the land of El Yemen, are anxious to see his face, and they assemble before the palace, exclaiming, Our Lord, light of Islam, and glory of our Lord, shows the effluence of thy countenance, but he pays no regard for them. This is with an interpolation, and the one that is put in there is, which is in the land of El Yemen. Let's look at it without the interpolation, and then it will jump out at us quite clearly what's going on here. So the men of Islam see him once in the year. We'll see this point being repeated multiple times. The pilgrims that come from distant lands to go unto Mecca are anxious to see his face. Where is he? Baghdad. Okay. And they assemble before the palace, exclaiming, Our Lord, light of Islam, and glory of our law, show us the effluence of thy countenance. But he pays no regard to their words. Here it makes more sense that the residence of the Exarch and Caliph is Mecca. Seeing his face is what the going on the annual pilgrimage is all about, which you can see there. So they go see him once in the year. Okay. Now, considering the geography, it doesn't seem likely that they're going to Baghdad and then do another round trip to Mecca, which is hundreds and hundreds of miles away. It seems that this is the objective in the 13th century, the 1260s. Okay. Is all of this making sense? So there we have it. Who'd ever thought that Heman, the Masters of the Universe, would have a link to Mahmud Ahmadinejad? So there you go. Talk to you all very soon. Bye-bye.